You had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Hi, everybody. 5 o'clock on a Friday. Time for another episode of Cello Chat. Couldn't be more excited to have as my guest today, Catherine Black. A whole lot of things I want to ask you about, Catherine. But first of all, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. And it's lovely to be with you talking about what we all love.
Excellent, outstanding. Well, so you have one of the most comprehensive websites. It's very thorough and very impressive, and it includes your story with how you got started on the cello. But it's always so interesting to ask everybody how they got started and how their journey took them to where they are today. Would you mind giving us that story?
Well, I grew up in a small village just outside Cambridge, and I went to the junior school in the next village. And the music teacher then was astonishing. She was such a class act. And she'd been my piano teacher, only I couldn't really manage the piano. And so at school, she said to me, I was 8, I think I was 8, Catherine, we need a cello in the orchestra. Will you learn it? I don't know that I knew what a cello was, but I said yes. And we had this really nice time. I went back to Cambridge recently and we went and drove to the gate of the school and I saw the window of the room in which I had my first ever cello lesson. And so Chris Thompson and the geography specialist, Mr. Kite, sat me down in lunchtime. I think I can't remember what day of the week it was. It's so long ago. And he was a cellist and he opened his Carl Fuchs cello method. And Chris was a very good violinist, but she knew that they're not the same thing. So we got going that way. And I then, after a couple of years, went to my first cello teacher. And that was Pamela Hind O'Malley, who Imogen Hulse dedicated The Fall of the Leaf to. And I was with her for a while. And then she, I think, intuited that I needed something new because, we all know when someone probably needs to move on. And she phoned up Christopher Bunting and asked if he was taking on new people. And miraculously, he said yes. And I had met him playing at the Cambridge Competitive Music Festival. I played Kol Nidre to him. God knows what he thought, but that was then. And I think those times were very different. So this was the 70s, and I went up to London for my first lesson. And, I'm sure it still happens, but I had so much awe for this person. So I don't think for a long time I actually either called him Mr. Bunting or Christopher. I think we were all sort of, terribly on edge. And yet he was he was sort of deeply kind. He was very intuitive. And I can remember him talking to me. He said, teaching really is about, you teach through relationship. And it really struck me. And he taught us all to sit in front of somebody new and swing round and try and absorb what you need to get going and to begin opening up this two-way passage through which you can do amazing things. And my first lesson, I can still just about remember, because when you got in touch with me the day before I'd got out my notebook. It's here and it's there. And I read the first things he did, and he wrote it on this paper. He got some A4 papers, folded them, and began writing because he knew he was going to write a lot. And this is so Christopher Bunting. He always started with the good stuff. Always. He was relentlessly positive. And I once got accused by a pupil of being relentlessly positive. And I thought, so where did that come from? And I think he did that to us. And he said, nice tone, good intonation, expressive in a rather calculated way. Left shoulder joint quite good. And then good bow hold, but my right shoulder was problem. I was very tense. I was a very shy person. And also I really felt my lack of technique. And Christopher was a master of that analytical, scientific, let me throw a lot of stuff at you and we'll work through it. So he treated us all. You got onto his ship, and on that ship was this incredible hothouse. Not that he made you feel pressurized, but he just handed you stuff and we were going to work through it. And I reread the Independence obituary of him, and before I came on here, and Christopher said something like, things happen way beyond the lesson. So he'd always give you hope. So when you'd say, oh, I can't play this, he'd say, yet. Yeah. And he was very tuned in to both us and himself. I think he knew himself well. I think he was a complicated person. And he would just keep leading you. He was like a really good shepherd, who would sort of move you over here and say, no, you need to go over there. And the things that did drive him nuts, I know that every now and then he'd just think, I'm not going to say that again. I've said it 25 times. And he would take your notebook over to the piano, and he had a stamp in triplicate saying, bend your right thumb, or left arm heights. And, I was looking at these things and I kind of went red in my own room, thinking, oh God. But then, my journey is everybody's journey. We all think that we're the only ones who can't do things. It's so easy to fall into that because we're so in our own heads and wanting to please, aren't we?
Wow. Well said. Well said. That's that just unpacking your reaction to Mr. Bunting. That was really great. So let's come back. Maybe I've got some follow-up questions, but then where'd you go from there?
Well, I was with Christopher for a couple of years before I went to the Royal College, where I carried on with him. And then I felt a need for change. And then I went to Eileen Croxford, and she was different, very different. And then after I left college, I had some time, a period of lessons with Richard Markson and David Smith, who was the fantastic cellist in the Alberni String Quartet at the time. And so new influences.
All right. And then you have, as several of my past guests, I think there's a couple of things that really stand out. You have a very varied background in performing. And then and then a love for teaching that there's just a number of things, the way you talk about your approach and your teaching philosophy, for example, on your website. So, and I want to ask you some more specific questions along those lines, but just for like my own students watching this, I wonder, like, how did your career evolve? You know, was there a degree of you intentionally trying to choose the route that it went, or opportunity knocking?
I think unconsciously the first and also the second. So, you know, life threw these things towards me. And I don't know, a steel stomach. So I wasn't going to sit down and do recitals of Beethoven when there are the greats out there doing it. And I think also I like working with people. So after college, one of my someone I was at college with, who also went to Christopher after college, and I went back to him for a period as well. And we formed a cello duo, and we went to Christopher for coaching. And it's so typical of him that he didn't just teach us and comment, but he then thought, hey, I'm gonna arrange the bourrées from the third suite for Catherine and Fiona. And then we got another piece commissioned by Christopher Fox. So we developed these interesting programs. We did, as we all did, a lot of background music, but we also did play for occasions, like the opening of the public health laboratories up in North London. So we did a mixture of background and more foreground. And then from that, I was asked to join someone I knew who was a singer-songwriter. And she wanted to form a jazz-based cabaret trio. So we worked together developing her songs and some jazz standards, and then found a drummer, and developed an act. And we ended up playing at the Edinburgh Fringe and getting onto radio as a result of that. We did a live performance at this program called Round Midnight that was beamed out, probably still is, from Edinburgh. And the reason why I'm laughing is because I have never seen so many microphone stands in one place. Sue, the singer, literally had to crawl on the floor to weave her way around to get to the piano. Wow. So we performed live, and then the BBC, when we got home, rang up, and this was Radio 2, said, would you be our artists of the week? So we recorded about 21 songs for them. And we created a show, which was semi-acted. We did, Sue, the singer, was at the center of it, but the drummer and I were also characters. So we had small speaking roles as well in this show that we put on in a tiny theatre in Battersea. So we were doing things like that and background as well. And then that came to an end, and I had the most amazing time I think the 90s for me were really interesting. And I was in London, so it was really rich and inventive. And I got a job in 92 at a junior school in Battersea, and there were 42 kids wanting to play the cello in 2 days. So I was teaching largely in groups. There was a school orchestra as well, and a violinist. Eventually there were 2 violinists, because once the Tories went and Labour came in, Tony Blair made these junior schools flagship schools for instruments. So our school was a flagship school for string playing. Down the road, one for brass, further down the road, one for guitar. So suddenly children were just being given that opportunity that used to be there. It was really amazing. So for 9 years, I taught beginners, which was such an education, because we've all taught beginners, but when you concentrate on them, it's a really powerful thing to do. I mean, they did evolve into grown-up cellists too, but that was quite intense. And the oh yeah, I was getting to this point. There was the violinist there said, why don't we try and get a group of string players together and let's form a group so we can do backing strings. And I thought, well, that's really thrilling. And we did. We found some other players. There were 6 of us all together, 3 violins, viola, cello and bass. And we got one of the violinists knew, to do an arrangement of Little Fluffy Clouds by the Orb. And also we did Here Comes the Rain Again. And we recorded these and put these out. And people came back saying, yeah, we'd like you to do backing work, but I think you've got something here. And then ultimately the Orb said, well, would you do a remix of our Oxbow Lakes and come and work with us? And we did. And what is so interesting, because people can be so disparaging from the classical world, or they were at the time. I don't think it's so typical now, thinking it's a whole different world, but it's all part of our expansive, thrilling world of music. And they were such interesting people. I went round to Alex Patterson's house to collect some tapes. And he said, sit down, listen to this. He was so excited. And sounds of nature came through. There was the breeze, there was water falling. And then gradually, Grieg's Morning came in. So there were sounds of nature wafting over it. And they were just such interesting people to work with. And from then, after that, I mean, I did quite a lot of TV playing as well. That was interesting, because you'd just be handed the cello part, told to memorize it. Once we memorized it in 30 minutes and then went on and did it live, which was terrifying. But it was so good to be put on the spot. And so after that, I then created, it was after a while actually, when I moved down here to Lewes from London, I just had my son and I wanted to work differently. And we got flooded. We were here for a few weeks before the Great Flood of 2000 happened. So we had to move away, but I had to keep driving back to Lewes because the house was being dried out. And I kept going to the library and I got out scores of William Byrd and Thomas Tallis. And I thought, what am I doing? And I thought, well, I don't know, but I'll carry on and find out. And then I realized, because Christopher Bunting really focused, I'm sure you know this already, he was very focused on song and singing and employing articulation and breathing with your bow. And I think that had a really big influence on me, because in that first lesson, he sent me away to arrange 3 songs, and they had to be from different eras. So I did something from the B minor Mass. I think it was the Agnus Dei. I did Come Away Death by Gerald Finzi, and then an aria from Don Carlos Verdi. And he was always talking about singers, and he really admired Chaliapin, who was a friend and supporter of Rachmaninoff. So I was doing all this listening, and I'd always grown up because my dad had an amazing record collection. So, and dad was in love with opera. And so we had these people on all the time at home. I was really fortunate. So here I was doing these scores of Tallis. And then I thought, oh, that's what it is. I've got 4 cellos here. You need to start getting people together to learn all this stuff that probably originated to a large extent with Christopher's teaching, and to share it with other people and to teach through this. Because what terrified me was, because we've all had that experience where you've had a lesson with someone who is probably thinking they'd rather not be there. And so I wanted to keep myself on my own toes. I think we have to keep refreshing. And I don't know about you, but certainly in my life, in my career, it's changed about every 10 years. And so gear changes I see as, in my case, being good and useful. So then I thought, oh, I founded cello courses in 2005.
Wow. Outstanding. Now I have some follow-up questions, if you will. Maybe we can work backwards. The not just the vocal pieces, but then you also have arrangements of other Renaissance writers. Yes, Gibbons.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I started Unsung Heroes with Renaissance and Baroque music.
Okay.
Yeah, because it also seemed like a really great way of mixing people together. I used to hear people say, well, I won't be able to play in an orchestra for another 5 years. And I think, oh my God, that's a long wait. You know, you're going to learn by being chucked in. And so that was part of my thinking there, was to get people who were really competent playing alongside newcomers, because actually we're all on this ship together. We really are.
Yeah.
And I know people actually find that sometimes hard to believe. They think surely everyone's got to be the same standard. And I don't believe that, because I mean, if I'm not learning, then I'm not teaching. So, and we're all learning and we're all teaching each other. You can just see someone do something and think, oh, yeah, penny dropped.
Yeah, outstanding. Yes. And humans, were such good imitators when we want to be. You know,
That's how
see
we
what
learn.
that person's doing, and well, I can do that. Sure enough, now my sound is more like that. So there's the you know, the lessons like ensemble and such, playing together in a cello quartet, and then the blending of sound, but also the repertoire that you were drawn to. I think there's some other interesting things in terms of the way that when we play vocal music like that, we can get inside of the nuances of intonation, you know, and hear when a chord isn't just not out of tune, but when it clicks unbelievably, you know. And even that elusive relationship between tone quality and intonation. Sometimes something can be a perfectly in tune chord, but if the tone is just kind of not even among the players, or not really resonating, it doesn't sound as satisfying as when the tone locks in too.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting that you say this, because Unsung Heroes, I'd listen to these scores on my computer and think, God, this would make an amazing album. And then Fiona, who I'd been in this cello duo with, I said, would you like to form a cello quartet? And so we did, and we were called String Theory Cello Ensemble. And it was so fascinating. You know, what you've just pointed out is so true. Do you know, we couldn't tune up in the normal way. We just thought, okay, if we're going to stand a chance here. So we would tune each of our strings. We'd go round the group, really, really listening. And that in itself was such a lesson, because we were all used to sitting down going, wah, 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 you know. And I do this in the group when we begin, because actually it's you start getting people listening and literally tuning in as you tune up. And yes, we had that same issue. However, all of us in that group just found that playing that music took you expressively and technically to a new place. I mean, Fiona was always talking, because she used to spend most of the time playing the top cello, so quite high up. And she say, it's amazing what this has done for my thumb position work. Because on the whole, you know, a lot of our repertoire, you're skidding around doing scales across the string, and it's very flashy. And here you are singing and not wanting anyone to know that that's your thumb, you know, and it's so good for your articulation too. I think it's very refining, is what I found. And then you've got to finish all your syllables. It's such a lesson in expansive spaciousness and being really rhythmic.
All right. Now, in terms of both Bunting having had you do those 3 vocal arrangements a while back, and then your experience since then, would you say that what would you say are the pedagogical benefits of students trying out arranging themselves?
Well, I think you're getting to the heart of the music. So, for instance, if you were to do a Palestrina motet, you're being so affected by those times. I mean, Palestrina wrote his music in praise. And I think very importantly, there is a groundedness that you become very awareness at the same time. And Tallis does this a lot. He's incredibly grounded, and yet he's reaching upwards. And I think you just get drawn into something that you would otherwise possibly miss. You might hear it in a concert or in a recording, but to go and arrange and then play it is so important, yeah. I think.
Yeah, it helps keep us from being our part centric. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's so important. Yes, it opens us up, because we've all spent too many years, you know, angsting about playing the cello in a room on your own, going slightly nuts, and then getting very nervous about performing. And then you go to this music that takes you, I think it opens you out spiritually.
For sure. All right. Well, another thing I'm very glad to hear you say is, you know, that, well, how do I put this? It's like everything that you have done, your website, you have all these places where you've seen a need, and you have, without fear, without hesitation, you've taken the initiative to fill that. So you look, for example, like somebody, like if my students were just to come across you in that way, like somebody who never had any issues with performance anxiety. Do you know what I mean? Because I think to some of them who also feel anxiety or self-consciousness, that they think that doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with somebody who has your willingness to do new things and try new things. From that standpoint, you seem fearless.
Yeah, and it's all a projection because I was really nervous coming on here. Every time I do an online class, my stomach is like, oh, because you want to do well. And we all have these fantasies that someone is going to put their hand up in a class and say, Catherine, you're rubbish. You know, I think, most of us also have imposter syndrome. And I think, so anyone out there who's been projecting onto me, I say I was a pretty intensely nervous person for a long, long time. And I still get nervous. And I think also we're not really doing something if we're not nervous, because it matters, doesn't it? It matters to us. And we mind because we want to give out and connect people up so much. I think, yeah, you need to be nervous. And it is very natural. I mean, I devised a performance workshop, which I haven't run for a few years, partly because of COVID. But, it's so leveling. And here's the thing for your students, Benjamin. I think when I moved down here, I met quite a few singers and one particular actor and theatre director. And what I've noticed is that singers and actors they're much, to me it seems, much more in tune with their nervousness. And they also talk about it. And, actors are trained, how to deal with nerves, singers too. And I think that, I mean, it's a long time since I was in a music college, but it is it's a vast area. I know that Christopher, because I spoke to Philippa, his daughter, a couple of months ago, I didn't realise this. She said he got so nervous. He would come off stage saying, oh God, it was dreadful. All of that. And I'm thinking, really? Because I was projecting onto him. That's what we all do. And, she said he was getting ready to do a masterclass up in Hampstead. And she said he practiced so hard. And she said, Dad, why are you doing that? He said, well, I've got to be better, because, I'm the adult. And yeah, it's a fantasy. We are nervous because things matter. And because we're putting on some kind of a show, doing an online class is a performance and a stressor, but for a good reason, a purpose.
Well, I will, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong or if you disagree, but maybe somewhat paraphrasing what you're saying about we're nervous because it matters to us. I from my perspective, there's a degree to which when it matters to you like that, and you really want it to be the best you can be, and you're not already assuming that you've arrived, for example, then that can make for a very good teacher, because you're not taking anything for granted. You know what I mean? As you demonstrate something, as you explain something, you're not just taking it for granted. And of course, that was the exact thing that student needed to hear. And now I'm moving on. You know what I mean? You stay aware of, well, did that work? Did that get the result I need? And there's also something on your website about the way you talk about, I guess it's kind of like this ship analogy that you've come back to a couple times, in terms of an attitude of being able to help push the student without them feeling pressurized, something about learning. Each individual is so different, and you're excited about learning enough about them to help them move where they want to go. Again, paraphrasing, but
yeah, I think that's absolutely it. And in this room here, my music room, I'm always saying to people and reminding them, it doesn't matter whether I've got one student who's about to audition for music college and others who've just begun, adult learners. I'm always saying, in this room, you've got to allow yourself to be at your very best and your very worst and everywhere in between, because it's a creative endeavor, and we've all conked out and kind of collapsed in something we're doing, thinking, oh God, that's the end. And actually, Christopher was always saying, just when you think it's all wound down, he says, you're breaking through. And I do quote him quite a lot, and he is right, because we have to push at boundaries and, to discover our own, we've got to be resilient in the right kind of way and not give up. I think is really important. And why do we have this extraordinary attitude that says, I'm going to play it brilliantly straight away? Well, we don't. We learn. We all sit down and learn. I mean, just an example of that. My husband gave me a copy of Frank Bridges' Oration. And I thought at Christmas, I'll just get going on this. It's going to take bit of time. And, every time you begin again, don't you?
Right.
And also I think we have this fantasy of teachers being kind of perfect. And I'm always saying, I'm going to fall off the string, probably. I'm going to be out of tune. It's what happens.
Well said. Well said. Well, back to you mentioning Bunting. I mean, I only got to work with him. I worked with him 3 of the international string workshops, and then felt like I stayed, or he stayed inside my head through his wonderful materials that are so different from anybody else's things, but still such an impression that he made. And there were a couple of us, for example, who just couldn't get enough of him, and we'd say, hey, we're going to an art museum, would you come with us? And he would come along, and his observations were just, I remember having to look up words. I thought I had a pretty big vocabulary, but it was enormous. But his ability to his perceptiveness, of even things that I think sometimes people think, oh, well, that's not important, but he was kind of almost like a bit of a Sherlock Holmes in terms of noticing everything.
That's such a good image for him. He was, and he had this, he was amazingly analytical, wasn't he? And scientific. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. And I'm like, there have been a few people in history who have just created some materials. I mean, in some ways, I guess Sevcik, he doesn't write a whole lot about, here's what you're supposed to learn from this exercise. But when you do it at those simple markings and everything, you immediately realize what it is that it's designed to fix. Apparently Bach, some of his pedagogical stuff, he's not writing about, now this is what you're supposed to learn, this is how you're supposed to pick up my counterpoint from, but you can tell as you go through these things. And with many of Bunting's exercises, if you just do like his octave, he has an octave one where you first intentionally mistune the thumb and then the third finger and then both of them, and by golly, you do that a couple times, and the next time you're playing a series of something in octaves, you that's exactly what your third finger and your thumb needed to know to get along.
I'd forgotten that.
But then his preface to the first book, I mean, it's something like 8 pages or something, but it is such a comprehensive statement about what it is to learn a skill like cello playing, and it's so profound. I love I love having students read that and come back and with their eyes wide and say, wow.
Yeah, yeah. That book was a pilot. I don't know whether you know this, but I was in a lesson and I looked down and saw this huge manuscript on the floor. And my dad was the university publisher at CUP.
Ah,
And I looked down and I felt like I was at home in a way because I was so used to seeing piles of manuscripts. And I said, "Oh, what's that?" And Christopher looked so wounded because do you remember how he'd hide behind his glasses? And he said, "That's my book and it's just been rejected." And I thought, almost thought, is he going to cry? And I piped up and said, "Well, my dad's a publisher. Um, can I take it?" Because Dad started the music list at CUP, and Dad really got Christopher, because you remember Christopher and how you could see his brain pulsing almost, couldn't you? And he would have been, I mean, first of all, he was upset by being rejected because he knew he had something so important. It was absolutely enormous, but Dad really got him, and he worked on it and pared it down, got Christopher to pare it down, and they were a really good team, and it was such an important thing.
that's neat. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. One of the questions I ask everybody I have on this show is about motivation. It's kind of the running theme. And sometimes I ask the question too late because there's clearly a lot that you've already
to talk about.
mentioned. Well, and that you've already mentioned that is so motivating. But just when a student gets to a point where they need a certain additional encouragement to keep going either with that particular piece or just getting their instrument out. Do you have some favorite approaches?
So if you're saying if they're feeling actually stuck,
or just I mean, let's say sometimes a student they get their instrument out, but they practice all of about, I don't know, half an hour or something, and then quit. They can't get to find the love of practicing where, oh, I'm out of time, oh rats, I'll have to continue tomorrow, where they know what they want to do and why they have their instrument in their hands.
yeah, I think it's almost like they're a balloon that's slightly deflating and it needs pumping back up again to its full glorious shape and size. And I think I think people need a lot of kind of tender care, but at the same time, directive, like, come on. And it really is, it's about believing in themselves, and it's finding out. I'd probably say, so why are we doing this crazy cello thing, and find out what their original thing is, and to actually tune back to a time when they were absolutely unable to put their cello down, but they had to because they had to sleep, to just remember that their inner core, because we all hit rocks. We do all hit rocks, and we need to be honest about it, but we also need to wait for a whoosh of water to come and get us unstuck, don't we? Mm-hmm. And it might be, I mean, when I think of myself, I have both walked away from something and just thought, right, I'm going to go and do something really enjoyable, whatever that might be. It would probably be going for a walk or read a book or watch a film or something, or going and putting on some, actually, I think when we've got stuck in our head and we've got deflated, I'd go and put some music on and have a really good dance.
Excellent.
Yeah, just to energize yourself, because you're going inwards when that happens, aren't you? And you need to kind of pour water on your own soil.
Very poetic. Oh, I like that.
Yeah, and also don't give up, but also let yourself off the hook, because we aren't machines. And I think when you're a music student, it's so pressurizing. You're practicing, you're rehearsing, you're writing. There is a lot going on, and we all need let up. Athletes don't train in the same way every day. And also, I have found for myself, at times when I've had injury at one point in my life and I couldn't play, and then surgery, couldn't play. When I came back, I was so much better because I hadn't played. And I know that people say, what? Surely not. But because we don't just practice at our cellos. You can air bow, you sing it, sing the bowing, sing the notes, just sing. Actually, singing is the best thing to get you back up.
You're here.
Mm.
Yeah. The mind is a curious thing. Getting it to let go of the bad habits and replace them with.
Yeah. And Casals only practice 3 hours a day, and Rostropovich too. So it really is, I think, and what I learned when I couldn't play and when I was coming back and I was literally doing 2 minutes, is what am I going to do in those 2 minutes? And I mean, at first it was, I'll get to the end of the bow, I hope. But so what I'm saying is that you will always renew yourself. It's just about having a bit more faith in yourself and what you're doing, because we're all here because we're nuts about the cello.
Yes.
Aren't we?
Yeah. Wow. Super inspiring. I love this. So what projects are coming down the pike? What do you have in store for the rest of 2024, for example?
Well, on Saturday, I'm doing a repeat class for the All About My Bow series. And we're doing the courant from the first suite. And then I've got, this all came about because of COVID. And then I created more of a technique class that's slowed down. And I thought I was doing it more for people in the earlier stages. And then other people said, well, I want to come too, because we've all got holes. So that's coming up. And then in the summer, I've got the Unsung Heroes Summer School, late July, early August. And then Through Coloured Glass, which is what I was doing with string theory. The music is played in continuously with some with a dramatic shape. It's a kind of personal story. It's of every man. Someone is seeking refuge and is in a really bad way, and it's about them moving from the troubles of the world, which is Dowland and Bird, gradually moving to a calm centre, which involves more Bird, very meditative, and Palestrina. And then it's this person who has sought refuge probably in a church. There's a big door slam as part of the soundscape. And then they're getting ready to kind of, like the cellists, to go back out and meet the world and think, yep, one foot in front of the other. And that we did that in 2022 for the first time as a course, and people are sent the music a few weeks beforehand and are assigned roles in each piece. And I just love it. Aren't we lucky to be just playing the cello and thinking all day about it?
Wow, that's excellent. Well, yeah, I certainly will include a link to the Cello Courses website, which again,
thank you.
I mean, I don't know, it had to have been quite an undertaking putting it together because of how comprehensive it is. But yeah, I highly recommend people. It's like there's some websites where and not to say they're cursory, but they just will, okay, here's my approach to cello technique, for example. But you carve out, here's something for the very important bow, and the role of the various pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
So, best of luck and more power to you, Catherine.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. Care.
Thank you very much.
And good luck, everybody out there practicing all week, and we'll meet back here next Friday at 5. Take care.
Thank you.
You had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello.